Greetings, this is the Questing GM. So I'm back with another RPG study hour for the Star Trek Avengers Quick Start Guide. Today's session we'll be going into the conflict chapter. So this is basically the combat rules of the Star Trek Avengers. But however, I don't think I'll be covering the entire chapter just within this session alone. Based on my calculations, in the first time we started, I think I was about to do about 6 videos, but I think I've managed to save one video from the previous chapter that we did. So especially with the number of options that's actually available in the conflict chapter, I think it's better to try to split them up to be a bit more easier to bite onto, rather than trying to cram it all into one session. So the plan for this session right now is to actually just read up on the encounters and the conflict actions sections, as you can see here. So that should only take up about 3 pages worth, and it probably will not be a very long video for that reason. But in any case, before I start with today's video, I would like to thank the Complex Game Apologists for coming in and stepping up to answer some of my questions that I asked in the previous video. So he provided some really interesting insights about how some of the things, especially things like traits and threats, are visualized in the core rule books, and he provided some ideas on how to use them while running as a game master. So once again, thanks to the Complex Game Apologist, and he has a running series of he has many videos about Star Trek Adventure. I think that dates back a couple of years ago. So definitely one YouTube channel you should definitely check out if you are interested in looking for more resources into understanding Star Trek Adventures in its entirety. Whereas for myself, I'm still sticking to the quick start guide for now. All right, so let's begin today's session. We'll start with encounters. Okay. Starfleet officers always do their utmost to avoid violence and conflict, seeking a diplomatic resolution whenever possible. There will always be times, however, when diplomacy breaks down and Starfleet personnel must defend themselves. Now, this is actually something that one of the questions that did bother me when I was reading through Star Trek Adventures and I was talking to one of my players who had some interest into it, is the sense that is the Star Trek Adventures intent or tone, at least, is to be something that is combat heavy, maybe in the vein of some certain other RPGs, and if based on my own exposure to the Star Trek franchise, which is only Next Generation, combat isn't actually a very predominant method of resolution. In I believe many of the episodes, there's always a more ethical, moral dilemma at stake, and it's more about the appeal is more about the decision making rather than actual combat. And it's not to say that combat is not appreciated in Next Generation, in what I know about Star Trek, but it did definitely set watching the Next Generation did definitely set some sort of precedence that combat is something that it's not supposed to happen as often as it should. And I'm actually kind of glad when I was reading this first line here that it's actually the first priority for a Starfleet officer to actually avoid violence and conflict, and diplomatic resolution should be the first method when it comes to any kind of possible situation. But in any case, there will always be times when diplomacy breaks down and you have really no choice to fight. So it's an interesting mindset for me to move on from there, because it sort of shows me that I should actually be paying a bit more attention into designing scenes that may not lead towards conflict, or the only natural conclusion is conflict, although that can be done sparingly. But it sort of validates my belief that is how that I can run a Star Trek adventure the way I want it, the way I envision it to be, or the way my impressions of it are. So that's actually sort of relief. All right, so rounds and turns. Combat is played out in rounds and turns, Within each round, each character in a conflict encounter takes 1 turn. At the start of a conflict, the game master determines a single character to take the first turn. This is normally a player character unless there's a story reason for a non-player character to go first. Although a play goes back and forth from player character to non-player characters until everyone has had a turn, the next round begins with the first turn going to the side that did not act last. So, interesting take, because there is no sort of initiative role being involved here. The rules quite arbitrarily give the first turn of the first round to a player character unless there's a story reason behind it, and then everyone just takes, and both sides just take their turns equally until everyone finishes the turn, and then on the second round the non-player characters get to start on the first turn. In a simple yet interesting, easy way to just get over with the whole initiative order thing. And interestingly enough, since they did not mention that it has to be a certain order of player characters and non-player characters acting, so you can sort of allow players to decide who among them would be the one taking their turn next, which actually does make it a more interesting tactical play compared to some other systems. So it's definitely something that I like it. I like it for its simplicity as well as its efficiency in what it lets player do and really determine what really happens in combat. From what I gathered, there's actually ways that a player character can sort of continue. Player characters can continue acting within the same round. Skipping non-player characters. I believe that's done through momentum. But let's just not get too ahead of ourselves, and let's just imagine this is how rounds and turns work for the time being. Okay, moving on, we are going into zones and distances. Zones are defined by the terrain around the characters, and tracking a character can be a matter of simple description. An enemy might be behind the control console or standing by the shuttle. This has the advantage of relying on natural language and intuitive concepts rather than specific game terms, and avoids the tracking of fiddly distance when there are many characters present. Movement and range tags need some sense of distance to make them meaningful. In combat, the relative placement of zones determines its distance. To keep things simple and fluid, range is measured in 1 state and 4 categories. Alright, so before we get into that, this is something that I'm also quite fond of, in the sense that the intent or the design concept behind Star Trek Avengers in terms of combat is using simple descriptions, as well as discarding the notion of using keeping track of everything by a fixed amount of distance, so that just to know where everyone is. This is definitely more theater of the mind based than compared to a grid, and I definitely favor combat systems that use theater of the mind more than grids, because only because there's less things on the table that you have to use and put down just to make things clear. Although I won't deny that there is downsides to using this method, because especially when things have to be really, really specific, and it's really a matter of how the system abstracts distance, and how they apply the abstraction to be in useful terms and useful meaning, so that players can make good tactical decisions even without the presence of a grid. So we'll get into that as we read into the zones. Right. The state of reach is when an object or character is within arm's length of the character. It's necessary to be in reach of a character to make a melee attack. Being within reach of an enemy is quite disruptive and distracting, adding +1 to the difficulty of any task other than a melee attack. Close range is defined as the zone the character is within at the time. Moving within close range is a trivial affair. Close range is in essence a distance of 0 zones. Medium range is defined as any zone adjacent to the character's current zone. Medium range is a distance of 1 zone. Long range is defined as objects and creatures 2 zones away from a creature's current zone. Long range is a distance of 2 zones. Extreme range is any creatures and objects beyond long range. Extreme range is a distance of 3 or more zones. So, pretty standard and pretty simple way of abstracting zones. You have obviously the closest one to you is in close, followed by medium, long, and extreme. You can just envision them as 4 different zones, and where your character is relative to which zone they are to the other characters in NPCs or otherwise. So it's still a relative based system in the sense that different characters are at different are in different zones in relative to each other. So it really depends. You still have to keep track of each character's placement of where they are currently and how and what their relative distance from each other. So that may be a little bit challenging to put it all in your head, although I believe with practice this is something that can be habitualized or overcome, that becomes a bit more natural, but it's I would say it's better to have a constant reminder of everyone's relative distance among each other in terms of zone speak. The only interesting thing that I'm a bit curious and a bit not unclear of is this idea of reach. Let's see if we can just get that. Yeah, reach. So state of reach is when an object or character is within an arm's length of the character. It's necessary to be in reach of a character to make a melee attack. Being within reach of an enemy is quite disruptive and distracting, adding +1 to any difficulty other than melee attack. Alright, so besides the point that if you're within reach, you add a difficulty, 1 difficulty to any task other than the melee attack. The one that I'm actually more curious is so is reach considered a zone, or is actually reach is actually a state when someone is considered close? And the interesting thing is, I think we'll get to it at some point. How do characters move between the zones? Like what is the cost of it? And in some sense, how far or how many zones can a character cover within, say, in their turn or within a round, so to speak. So that's something that I'm interested in. And the thing is, the reason why I brought up reach is that because if someone is within in a close zone with you, is it an assumption that everyone's within reach of each other, or it may not be so, and there has to be an additional step or additional action that is required to bring someone from close to reach? And also, what is the point of having the reach distinction not being a zone by itself but rather a state? So there may be some mechanical implications of that, but we'll see as we get on further, and we'll see if that's something that's being explained or explored. All right, so moving on, we're going into conflict actions. Okay. All right. During a turn in combat, a character can attempt 1 task and several minor actions. A character can perform 1 minor action for free. Each additional minor action costs momentum immediate equal to the number of minor actions already performed that turn. Each minor action can only be attempted once per turn. Okay, so that's actually there's about like 3 very important rules here about minor actions. First of all is what can a character do within a turn is 1 task, several minor actions. However, there's a restriction that only the first minor action is free. Each additional minor action costs momentum equal to the number of minor actions performed that turn. So if I'm understanding this correctly, it would say that if my first minor action is free, my second minor action would cost 2 momentum because the price it would be one momentum because there's only 1 action before it. My third minor action would cost 2 momentum, and my 4th minor action would cost 3 momentum, and if I perform an actual 5th minor action, it will be 4 momentum. So that's actually pretty high. The price stacks up, and I think that's probably the limit. I think you cannot even go more than 3 minor actions because your maximum pool is 6. So you should be spending you should be spending 6 momentum points just to perform your 3rd minor action in the same turn. Okay, and then there's also the last restriction is that each minor action can only be attempted once per turn, so you cannot repeat minor actions that's already been done. So what are the minor actions and how many are they. I think I put it down in the list, and it seems to me that there are all a total of 7 minor actions altogether. So we'll be going through all of that, and I think we'll call it the night. So there'll probably be a lot of discussions while we are going through the options and see what are the implications of them. So the other important distinction is that there is a task and there are minor actions. So I'm not sure, are they interchangeable in the sense that are they minor actions that will be considered a task, and are they tasks that would cause a minor action? I believe most likely not, but it will be interesting if there is this sort of bridge between the gaps, so to speak, because that could actually give a bit more variance to the tactical options that the character may want to do. And the idea of being able to spend momentum to do more minor actions is actually sort of interesting, because are they minor actions that is worth spending momentum for? That's something we will need to find out as we go through the list. So minor actions, the first one we have is aim. All right, the character may reroll a single d20 made on an attack during this turn. Draw item, the character may pick up an item within reach, draw a weapon, or pull out another item carried on their person or stored in their gear. Drop prone, the character immediately drops to the ground, making them a smaller target. A character may not drop prone and stand in the same turn. Interact, the character interacts with an object within the environment. Complex interactions may require a task instead. So that's what I was talking about, that are there any crossovers between minor actions and tasks? And yes, so I guess the general rule of thumb is that if it's a simple interaction, then it will cause a minor action. But if it's a complex interaction, then it may not be a minor action, but it will be a task instead. So instead, the players would still have to spend their task for the turn, and then still have their minor action to do something else. Alright, movement. The character moves to any point within medium range. This minor action cannot be carried out if the character performs any movement related task. Okay, so there's a distinct. So there is one limitation here, that if you've already performed a movement related task within that turn, you cannot then move again with the movement minor action. Now, it says here that the character moves to any point within medium range. So that means a character can move from close to medium within a turn. So I guess that's the limit. And given the fact that because you cannot choose another minor action again in the same turn, that's probably the furthest that the character can go within a turn. So this is actually another interesting thought, because if you perform a movement related task, that actually means that you are effectively stopped from moving up to the medium range. So unless that movement related task actually brings you to the medium range, that could actually be a hindrance. So that's actually something interesting to keep in mind, and designing a scene for combat. Yeah, there is some practical implications for doing so. Alright, so let's move on to the next list. Prepare. The combat character prepares for or spends time setting up a task. Some tasks require a minor action to be taken before the task can be attempted, or the minor action gives a bonus. So that's an interesting application, I would say, for the minor action plus task. This actually means you can effectively spend a full round just on performing a task, whether it's for setting up or whether it's to gain a bonus. And obviously, I think as a GM, you will probably want to let the players know what are the benefits of using the prepare minor action in preparation for a task, whether it's a bonus or whether it's a requirement. Alright, stand. If the character is prone, they may use a minor action to stand, removing all the benefits and disadvantages of being prone. A character may not stand and drop prone in the same turn. So this is repeated both in the prone and stand. So this is a very clear line that you're not, besides what's intended, you're not supposed to stand and prone in the same turn. I'm not sure if there will be any explanations of what are the benefits and disadvantages of being prone, but it's something it's a rule to just keep in mind. And it sounds like, I mean, obviously it sounds like obviously that there's some combat benefits and considerations to keep prone or to keep standing. Yeah. If there's only one questionable meaning is there a difference between prone and kneeling? And some players may want to may ask for that distinction, that is it better for me to kneel or is it better for me to prone, and what sort of benefits do I get for kneeling in comparison to prone, especially when it comes to matters like range weapons. But I think that's just outside of the scope of the mechanics, and I think that would fall into that very dirty area of GM arbitration, in trying to finding a balancing act between the benefits and disadvantages of kneeling and prone. But that's just me, and maybe it doesn't really matter that much. All right, so next we are going to combat task, and there are altogether 11 combat tasks. So I think that once we've gone through all that, I think we will be done for the night. So 11 is quite a bit, and these are the tasks. So there's actually quite a lot of options, you could say, when it comes to tasks and minor actions, and naturally there will be some that is more often used than not, but it's actually quite important for players to realize that how many options they have available to them, especially when it comes to certain games. Like in Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, some players may actually be not aware of some of the options that are actually available to them because they're just too used to the idea of moving and attacking. But I think Star Trek I think first of all, it's important for the GM to know that there are these options available to the players, but it's also just as important to know like how can they be used on the table and in the conflict situation. So let's get to it and let's read about combat task. Alright, combat task 1, assist. The character performs some activity that will grant an ally an advantage. The character nominates a single ally with whom they can communicate and assist their next task. So advantage, as you notice here, is not without a capital A, so I don't think this is meant to be read as the trait, and it's the assistance to your next task. So I think this is actually referring back to the basic operations chapter, where I think there's this explanation of how do you use an assist, and basically it's just rolling 1d20. If you succeed on that, you add 1 success to the character who's performing the task. So that's not too complicated. I believe there is a talent in one of the pre-gens that actually allows this assist to be done using a specific attribute and discipline. So this may be the actual combat task that they are referring to in use of that talent. Alright, so attack. The character attacks an enemy or another viable target. Create advantage. The character creates some beneficial circumstance or removes a complication. So this is interesting because I think we haven't come to the point of knowing a combat situation where a complication can be occurred. But since these are tasks, so a task naturally means you have to roll your d20s, and they will be complications that happens that arises when you roll a natural 20. I can't remember do you get complications as a result of threats, or if you pay, or maybe when the GM uses threats on you to cause a complication, and then a character can use the create advantage to try to remove it. Although my question here is, how would the character know when to create advantage? Because they will not you will only want to remove complications when a complication is being generated as a result of dice rolls of most likely another character. So is create advantage something that you have to sort of do in advance? Like my character does create advantage, and the next character that goes creates when the next character creates a complication, my create advantage actually steps in and removes it before it even happens. So that's a consideration. I think that may need some sort of clarification if someone is inclined to do so. But yeah, I'll be interested to know how is this supposed to actually work. But in any case, I think beneficial circumstance is actually probably the most primary and most common use of the create advantage. Obviously this needs a better explanation. Is this in the terms of like what's the difference between create advantage and assist? uh, like I need a better distinction between the two to so that characters and myself as a GM would know how to use them. Okay, moving on, we have direct. This action is only available for commanding officers. The character nominates a single other character present who may immediately attempt a single task assisted by the commanding character. So this is also another potentially confusing task between direct and assist. I'm guessing this is, I mean, then again, we are not sure what is a commanding officer like. This could be a class related thing, like if only players who play as first officers can use this ability. And then the idea is that instead of them performing the task, they're actually getting someone else, a single other character present to perform the task for them, assisted by the commanding officer. So is this a tool? Is this something like a 2-for-1, in the sense that by using the direct action, you get another character to perform the task, and the commanding officer is immediately using the assist to give whatever benefits there is to the task. That's actually that's potentially the way I'm seeing it. May be more interesting to see in action, and it is a considerable advantage of doing direct rather than assist, if I understand it correctly. Again, this is definitely one of those areas that I'm more than happy to hear someone clarify for me. Okay, guard. The character finds some defensible position, focuses on their surroundings, or otherwise gain additional readiness for an attack. Again, no real benefits been explained here of what it actually does. This may tie in more closely with the attack rules once we start reading about that. But as it is right now, this is an option, but has no meaning at the moment. All right, pass. The character chooses not to attempt a task. This is strangely an option that I actually do appreciate, because for example in Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, there's actually no option for you to actually pass on your turn. So by raw, if you were playing it strictly by raw, a character cannot choose to not perform the actions that they are given. In this case, it's either a move action or a major action. So this is actually this has passing a turn definitely has some potential tactical advantages of doing so. Seeing this here is definitely interesting. Whether it's being used or not is probably the bigger question, and it'll be more interesting to see if there's actually a better reason for doing so. All right, ready. The character declares that they are waiting for a specific situation or event to occur before attempting a task. Okay, so I'm not terribly a huge fan of ready mechanics, because especially the way like how Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition uses it, and and that hasn't really changed since in its earlier iterations. Only because the condition and triggers of ready mechanics are always very clunky to me, and always very ill-defined. So it actually doesn't really make the games run as smoothly once somebody readies it, because there are considerations of what happens to the initiative count. If let's say a effect is supposed to take place as a result of the target of the condition, does the effect come in first, or the ready action takes place before that, potentially interrupting the effect? And having the action just explained in a simple line like this is definitely makes it potentially falling prey into that very gray area of what actually happens during when there's an execution of a ready action. So all that being said, I think Star Trek Adventures so far doesn't set itself up for some dangerous loopholes in regards to ready, especially when it comes into the initiative order. Because basically it's a matter of who goes first. But I would definitely much prefer to see a more well thought out ready mechanic in any system, regardless if it's Star Trek Adventures or in any other system. So This is not it's not exactly a vote of confidence. I'm only I'm also curious if this is something that has to be related with the minor action of prepare, in the sense that this could potentially be a requirement or a combo with the prepare minor action, in the sense that one character has to finish preparing before the other character can initiate the task that has to be done. Yeah, so that's one way I can look at it, but again, I have my concerns about ready action mechanics in any game. Okay, moving on, we have recover. The character gets behind cover and attempts a fitness plus command task with a difficulty of 2. They gain 1 additional resistance for each effect roll on cover dice and regain the ability to avoid an injury. Regain 2 stress per momentum spent. Alright, so we are introduced to some new mechanics here. There's the idea of resistance. There's a mention here of effect roll. So it means that the challenge dice is actually being rolled at some point, but we are performing a fitness command task, which is d20s. So I don't exactly know when do the effect from the challenge dice actually comes in, or cover dice in this sense. So I don't exactly know where exactly the cover dice comes in. This is also another mechanic that we are not familiar with at this point. I'm guessing this is going to be well explained, further especially when it comes to attack, because cover is part of the attacks. And also there's this ability of avoid an injury, which I believe is also covered within the attack section, especially in terms to damage. So at this point right now, recover is just one big potentially useful mechanic, but useful action task that we're just not familiar enough with the concept to understand how it really works. And there's also the idea of stress per momentum spent, because that's also indicating that this action is only useful when there is momentum being generated, unless the base effect is gaining additional resistance for each effect roll on cover dice. And interestingly enough, recovers is a reference to getting behind cover, as well as guard is also a matter of finding defensible position, which you could argue is not necessarily equates to cover. So on a narrative and descriptive sense, there could be some real differences here. And this also brings up the question that if a character is not within reach of cover, does that mean that this action is not allowed by that? I would think only a very adversarial GM would be very inclined to this idea, but I think for myself, I'm more than happy to just give players any moment of any place that has cover at any moment. Maybe at best if it requires a certain them to be prone at much, but I don't see I don't think I would like to abuse cover availability for my players just to stop them from using the recover ability. But then again, there may be a reason for doing so, because if the recover task is something that is overly beneficial, then it sounds. So we'll see. All right, we have sprint. The character attempts to move further and more quickly. This is a fitness plus security task, difficulty 0. Success means you move 1 zone, 1 additional zone per momentum spent, repeatable. So I'm guessing this is supposed to be the opposite, or the task version of, I would say, is the movement minor action. So movement minor action lets you move from close to medium, whereas sprint has the potential to bring you further beyond medium. You can within 1 zone. And the interesting thing here is a difficulty 0 task. So you will have to recall what we read about difficulty 0, in the sense that there's actually there may actually be no die roll involved, and there is no successes being scored for a 0 task difficulty. But in this case, you would want the players to roll for the sprint task, because the point is for them to generate momentum that they can spend immediately to move beyond the normal areas that they give. Because if let's say they do fail, they do not generate any successes while using the sprint task, which is a fitness plus security, then they would still get to move at least up to medium zone. The gamble here is trying to move beyond medium zone to potentially to long, and I believe it's extreme. Long and extreme, yes. So they would need to, so the maximum benefit is trying to generate 2 successes to try to get as the furthest they possibly can. Although you could also argue that since extreme is actually a distance of 3 or more zones, you may fall into that idea that you may want to be specific to the number of zones they have moved from their current position, keeping in mind that it may be extreme for whoever, it may be extreme range for whoever's on the same zone with that character, but it may not be an extreme range for characters who are further away from that, and that could actually be 3 zones and out. So that's maybe one of the unwritten rules about sprinting, but I think it may not need to go to that length to really require that amount of tracking, because then otherwise they would kind of defeat the purpose of avoiding tracking, which is, you know, sounds like to be the intent of the rules. Alright, so we're down to the last 2 actions, and we'll call it for the night, and you know, we pretty much almost spent out the time of the day. So first aid, the character attempts to treat the injury of a character within reach. So within reach obviously means it has to be at least within in a closed zone. Interestingly enough, there is no mention of what attribute and discipline is being used here, and treat injury doesn't seem to be like a sort of mechanic, you know, as compared to avoid an injury. So this definitely needs some clarification, like how does this treat injury thing work. I suspect it will be explained when we talk about damage, and maybe there will be more distinctions between first aid and say recover, because recover seems to have a more well-defined set of rules that comes with it, whereas first aid doesn't. I'm guessing it's something related to treating injuries, whereas recover is something that is really about stress. But we'll have to get down the road to really see about it. Okay, and lastly we have other tasks. A range of other tasks can be performed during combat. The game master can use their discretion in setting limits on this task. So this is all fine and dandy, having a placeholder for all other tasks, and I believe even in Dungeons and Dragons there's actually options for the DM to actually say that there are other actions that the players can perform, but at this point that falls into the GM's authority and arbitration, and the fruitful void, you could say, into how this task should be defined. In this case, although this is probably intended for the players, because this is still the player side of the rules, it's all up to the GM's discretion. But I would like to see, and I'm not expecting it to be in a Quickstart guide, but I would like to see those guidelines being provided to the game master, like what should the task entail, and how do you differentiate what is considered a task and what is considered a minor action. Interestingly enough, there is no like holdover, or there's no open minor action. There is at least including Quickstart guide, there is the well 7 minor actions, whereas there is 10 well-defined combat tasks and potentially many more than just the 10. Okay, so that's another session in the books. Again, this is another set of rules that some of it makes sense, some of it hasn't made sense yet, because we need to get further into it. I hope whatever questions that I've raised here myself will be explained at some point within the Quickstart, and only then we can really assess and weigh the options that are given so far. 9 minor actions and 11 combat tasks actually does sound a bit daunting. It may not be a number that some players are used to, especially if they're from the Dungeons and Dragons more. But that it makes it all the more interesting, because that's why you want to see how all these options come in together and what really makes a better option over the other in whatever situation that they find themselves in. So I guess that will be all for now, and our next session we will definitely be pretty much reading up the rest of the quick start guide. We will be talking about attacks and damages, commit momentum span, types of actions, and there are so many and obviously you can see there's another list of options available to that. So I guess that'll be all for tonight, for this session of the RPG Study Hour Star Trek Avengers Quick Start. We've talked about how encounters are defined by the zones and how rounds and actions take place. You have seen the different type of actions that can happen within a conflict, which is minor actions and tasks, and we've read through every options that are available we have read through every option of minor actions and combat task. So this is the Question GM signing out for now, and I'll see you in the next RPG Study Hour for Star Trek Adventures Quick Start Guide.